It started with laughter, the cruel kind that echoes louder than the drill sergeant's commands. The morning sun burned down on the training field as 50 recruits pushed through mud, sweat, and orders that made their muscles scream. Among them was Emily Carter, the quiet medic in training who wasn't supposed to be here. She was smaller than most, always gentle-spoken, with eyes that seemed to feel everything too deeply. Nobody thought she'd last a week. The squad was halfway through a live combat simulation when it happened. Gunfire blanks cracked through the air, smoke bombs filled the field, and somewhere in the chaos, a flashbang detonated too close. The blast didn't hurt her physically, but the sudden roar and smell of burning powder sent her spiraling. Emily dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as tears streaked down her face. She wasn't screaming, just shaking, frozen. The others didn't stop. They couldn't. But afterward, when the commander called for a break, the whispers started. Cried during drill, someone snorted. What's she gonna do when it's real? Maybe she'll patch us up while crying, another joke. By dinner, the story had spread across the base. The medic who cried, it didn't matter that she'd scored top marks in first aid, or that she'd volunteered for every overnight shift. One crack in the armor, one moment of emotion, and they had labeled her weak. But Emily didn't argue. She smiled politely, kept to herself, and pushed harder. She cleaned the infirmary after everyone else had gone, stayed up late reading trauma manuals, and practiced chest compressions until her palms blistered. The laughter faded eventually, but the memory of it didn't. The commander, Major Reese, noticed her more than she realized. He was a hardened man, the kind who'd seen more than he'd ever admit. Everyone feared him, but when he looked at Emily, there was something different in his eyes, like curiosity mixed with quiet respect. 2 weeks later came the Iron Field exercise, an overnight endurance and combat simulation designed to break even the toughest recruits. They called it the Wall because it's where most people hit theirs. It started simple, a 5-mile march with full packs, a staged ambush, and then medical response under pressure. Emily was assigned to Team Bravo, a group already skeptical of her. The sergeant briefed them quickly. This is live terrain. You'll be timed. Injuries, real or simulated, are to be treated immediately. Fail to stabilize your man and your whole team fails. They moved out at dawn. The forest was quiet except for their boots crunching leaves. Emily stayed near the back, eyes sharp, scanning for traps or signs of distress. She wasn't the fastest, but she was focused, methodical. An hour in, the first simulated casualty appeared. Private Duran lying near a creek bleeding from a fake leg wound. The others hesitated, waiting for orders, but Emily was already beside him. Pressure on the wound, she said firmly, her voice clear despite her racing heart. Her hands didn't shake this time. Duran, talk to me. What's your pain level? He played along, groaning, and she wrapped his leg tight with expert precision. The sergeant timed her silently. 90 seconds later, he gave a small nod. Stabilized. By noon, the exercise had turned brutal. They were low on water, covered in mud, and the sound of blanks firing in the distance made everyone twitchy. Still, Emily didn't slow down. That night, a storm rolled in. Unexpected, cold, and violent. The rain turned the ground to sludge, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Then came the distress call. Alpha Squad down. Possible real injury. Major Reese's voice cut through the comms. All nearby medics respond. This is not a drill. Emily's stomach tightened. She was the closest. She looked at her team, who were drenched and shivering. Stay put, she ordered. I'm going. By yourself? Someone asked, but she was already moving. She ran through the storm, lightning flashing across the sky, her boots sinking with every step. Her poncho whipped in the wind, and her pack felt like a boulder. Still, She ran. When she reached the coordinates, she saw two figures, one conscious, one not. The downed soldier's leg was twisted at an impossible angle, blood seeping into the mud. This was no simulation. "Stay with me," Emily shouted, kneeling beside him. Her gloves were soaked, her hair plastered to her face, but her focus was razor sharp. She checked his pulse, airway, then reached for her field kit. The conscious soldier tried to help but was panicking. He fell. He just fell. "Breathe," she said calmly. "I've got him." She worked quickly, improvising a splint from a broken rifle stock and tightening the tourniquet until the bleeding slowed. The rain made everything harder. Bandages slipped, mud mixed with blood, but she didn't stop. Her fingers went numb, but her mind didn't falter once. By the time the evac team arrived, she was covered in mud, her arms shaking from exhaustion. But the injured soldier was alive and stable. When they lifted him onto the stretcher, Major Reese appeared from the shadows, rain dripping from his cap. "Who treated him?" he barked. Emily stood slowly, wiping her face with a trembling hand. "I did, sir." He stared at her for a moment that felt like forever. Then he gave a short nod. "Good work, Carter." No one said anything else. They just watched as she followed the stretcher back through the storm, her small frame silhouetted against flashes of lightning. The next morning, word spread fast. The medic who cried had saved a man's life alone in the storm. Still, the whispers didn't stop completely. Just changed tone. "She got lucky," some said. "She's still soft," others muttered. But Major Reese said nothing. He simply observed. A week later, during a morning assembly, he called the entire company to attention. His voice carried across the field. "In this unit," he began, "we test for strength, not just in muscle, but in mind." He scanned the line of soldiers before resting his gaze on Emily. Last week, when conditions broke down, one soldier didn't hesitate. She risked herself, stabilized a critical casualty, and carried him to safety. Murmurs spread. Emily's heart pounded. Reese stepped forward. That kind of resolve doesn't come from pride or showmanship. It comes from iron in the spirit. He paused, then turned to face her fully. Carter, front and center. She obeyed, still unsure if this was praise or punishment. Reese saluted. "From this day on," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "you'll be known as the Iron Medic." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then, slowly, the recruits began to clap. Hesitant at first, then louder, until the sound filled the field. Emily blinked in disbelief. The same people who'd mocked her were now cheering. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like something deeper. She wasn't proud because they finally respected her. She was proud because she hadn't changed who she was to earn it. And yet, even as applause rolled through the air, she noticed Major Reese's expression. There was something unreadable there, like he knew something the others didn't. Because what no one else knew was that the man Emily had saved hadn't just fallen. He'd been pushed, and the commander intended to find out by whom. The storm had ended, but the tension on base hadn't. The air felt heavier, as if the clouds had left their weight behind. The soldier Emily had rescued, Corporal Hayes, was recovering in the infirmary, leg in a cast, mind still foggy from the painkillers. He didn't remember much, or at least that's what he told the commander. But Major Reese wasn't buying it. Emily didn't know about the whispers yet. The ones in the commander's office, the reports quietly rewritten, or the footprints near the ravine that didn't match Hayes's boots. All she knew was that everyone suddenly treated her differently. People nodded when she passed. Some even asked for her advice, but she didn't trust it. Respect that changes overnight isn't respect, it's shock wearing a friendly mask. She tried to keep her head down. She spent hours in the infirmary, checking vitals, cleaning wounds, sorting medical kits. She liked order, predictability, things that made sense. But nothing about that night in the storm did. She'd replayed it 100 times in her head. The slope had been steep. Yes, but Hayes wasn't clumsy. Something about how he'd fallen didn't add up. 2 days later, the commander called her in. His office was plain except for the old medals on the wall and a photo of his unit from a long-ago war. "At ease, Carter," he said, motioning for her to sit. She did, trying to still her nervous hands. "You did good work out there," Reese said quietly. "Real good." "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward. "But I need to ask you something. When you found Hayes, did you notice anyone else nearby?" Emily blinked. "No, sir. Just Private Dawson. He was calling for help." Reese nodded slowly. "And you didn't see what caused the fall?" "No, sir. It was raining hard. I could barely see." The commander studied her face for a moment, then sighed. "All right, that'll be all." But as she stood to leave, he added softly, "Stay sharp, Carter. Not everyone here wears their stripes honestly." The words clung to her for days. That weekend, she was assigned to lead a first aid refresher for recruits. It was supposed to be routine, but as she demonstrated a splint on Dawson, the same private from the accident, she noticed something strange. When she wrapped the bandage around his arm, he flinched, not from pain but guilt. "Something wrong, Private?" she asked, watching his eyes. He shook his head too quickly. "No, ma'am, just old bruise." But later, as she was packing up the kits, she overheard him whispering to another soldier near the lockers. "I told you it was an accident," Dawson hissed. "I didn't mean to push him that hard." Her heart froze. She didn't hear the rest. She stepped away silently, pulse hammering in her ears. By nightfall, she couldn't sleep. She knew what she'd heard, but she also knew what reporting it could mean. In the military, rumors spread fast and truth slower than mud drying. Still, she couldn't stay silent. The next morning, she went straight to Major Reese. His eyes darkened as she repeated what she'd heard. "Good work, Carter," he said grimly. "You did the right thing." Within an hour, Dawson was pulled from training and brought in for questioning. Nobody saw him again for 3 days. When he returned, he looked pale, like he hadn't slept. Word spread fast that he'd confessed. He and Hayes had been arguing over stolen morphine doses. The fight turned physical. The shove was meant to scare, not harm, but Hayes had slipped and gone over the edge. It could have been fatal if Emily hadn't gotten there in time. Reese called another assembly that afternoon. The whole base gathered, silent and uneasy. He didn't mention the theft or the fight, just discipline, duty, and integrity. Then he turned toward Emily again. "Carter didn't just save a soldier," he said. "She saved this unit from rot." The soldiers cheered again, but this time the sound was different. Not just respect, but gratitude. Even the ones who'd mocked her looked down, embarrassed. Emily felt her throat tighten, but she didn't cry. Not this time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the barracks, Reese found her by the training field, staring at the empty bleachers. "You did more than you realize," he said, stepping beside her. "I just told the truth, sir." He smiled faintly. "That's the hardest thing to do around here." They stood in silence for a while, the wind carrying faint echoes of laughter and clinking metal from the mess hall. Then Reese added, "You remind me of someone I once served with." She was a medic, too. Never carried a weapon, but everyone followed her because she never ran from fear. People mocked her, too, until the day she saved us all. Emily looked at him, eyes soft. "What happened to her?" Reese's gaze lingered on the horizon. "She didn't make it, but she never broke. That's what iron really means, Carter. It bends, but it doesn't break." For the first time since the start of training, she understood. Strength wasn't about never crying, never showing fear. It was about feeling it and still moving forward. Weeks passed, and Emily earned her medic's insignia. She stayed quiet, steady, and fierce in her purpose. The title Iron Medic followed her wherever she went, but she wore it not as pride but as promise to stay unshaken when others faltered, to hold fast when fear tried to take over. Her reputation spread beyond the base. Other units requested her during drills. Some said she had nerves of steel. Others called her the calm in chaos. But to Emily it was simpler than that. She just refused to quit. Months later, during a multi-unit operation in the Mojave, a transport vehicle overturned during a sandstorm. The radio was down, visibility near zero, and once again it was Emily who ran toward the wreck, not away. She crawled through shattered glass, wrapped tourniquets with bleeding hands, and shouted instructions that cut through the roaring wind. When the storm cleared, 3 men were alive because she hadn't hesitated. That night, Major Reese sent a message to command. Corporal Emily Carter represents the highest standards of service. Recommend immediate commendation. She never asked for medals. When one finally came, pinned on her uniform by the same commander who'd once doubted her readiness, she simply nodded. After the ceremony, she walked back to the field where it all began, the same place they'd once mocked her for crying. The grass was dry now, the air still. She stood there for a while, remembering the storm, the laughter, the tears, and how far she'd come. Somewhere behind her, a few recruits were training under the new sergeant's watch. She heard one fall and curse softly. Another laughed. Emily turned slightly and called out, "Hey, check your tone. Everyone falls once. What matters is who gets back up." The recruits straightened immediately. She smiled faintly and walked away, her shadow stretching long across the field. From that day on, new soldiers learned about her story not as gossip but as legend. The medic who cried once and never again, the woman who stood firm when everyone else broke. They called her the Iron Medic, and though Emily never chased the name, she carried it like armor. Not to shield her from pain, but to remind her that courage doesn't mean not feeling. It means feeling deeply, and still choosing to act. Because tears don't make you weak. Sometimes they're just proof that your heart is still human enough to care, even in a world that demands iron. And when that heart stays steady in the storm, that's when iron turns unbreakable.